All right. So this, by the way, is not my work. This is Belgium last year in Genk, Belgium. Manifesta, which is the European Biennial of Contemporary Art, held the biennial in this large coal mining facility that had been shuttered. So that's what that is. But now, getting on to my work. This is not the first painting that I did of this series, but it is the first one that I have a slide of that's respectable. The first one, this all began on a landscape painting, in a landscape painting class. We went on a field trip out to the center of Pennsylvania, out into the Appalachians, the coal country. And we were allowed to go onto the property of the St. Nicholas coal breaker, which was the largest coal breaker in the world up until about World War II. It has since been shuttered, and we were told that we could walk around in the property, but we were not allowed to go up the mountain or up the hill, mountain of sorts, to the tower, because that was just off limits, and we were also not allowed to go into any of the buildings. So what's a guy to do but figure out how can I possibly get into this tower? So I went all the way around the edge of the property with another guy, and we went back up around. And what made it even more dramatic or intense was the fact that the stairwell of the tower was on the outside of the building. And it was 5 stories. So while you're going up the stairwell, they can see you, or the security guards and what have you, and other people in the program could see you down at the bottom of the hill. So the idea was to get around it as quickly as possible and then get up inside, so that way you could avoid being caught. So needless to say, there were stairs missing, and we were jumping over these big gaping holes. And so we got up to the top, and we were, I immediately was hit by this air, and it was the same redolent air that I was confronted with when I was a young boy, and I was so thrilled with running through my grandparents' old Victorian barn that they had stopped using, but was still accessible, of course. And then I was also struck by the light and by the color and just the richness of the whole scene that was before me. Not to mention the fact that I had made it up without injury into the tower. So I walk into the tower, and there was a long shaft that ran from the tower down into the main coal breaker. And when I looked down that shaft, the light that was coming in from all the windows that ran on each side of the shaft, and how the light bounced off of all of the machinery that was going down the shaft, and the colors and the richness of the whole scene, I knew that this was what I wanted to capture. But I wasn't quite sure about the concept. And it was the concept that has evolved over time, beginning with, I guess, the romantic quality of German painters like Caspar David Friedrich, to more of a socio-political element. So anyway, this is not that painting, or this painting is the first painting that I did in graduate school. This is in an area called, in an area of West Philadelphia, and they had been there were all these like old, I'd say, turn of the century row homes that were being torn down because they were considered blight, and they were making way for a strip mall. So I saw this, and I would drive by it, and I just was like, you know, this just speaks to me in some way. I mean, I just became obsessed with it. And then, so one day, it was in West Philadelphia is it's a very rough area of the city. I mean, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Philadelphia, but at one time we were known as Killadelphia, which wasn't that long ago, I think a year or two. But anyway, so I got my camera, which at the time was a 35 millimeter manual, went out, loaded the film, got out of my car, climbed up on this rubble or ruin, and just started taking pictures. And then I went back to my studio and worked from the photographs to come up with this composition, which is entitled Artifice from 2001. Moving on, this particular piece is probably, this is basically the first piece that I went big, like really big. In the sense, big meaning like 6 feet by 4 feet. I had talked with some people about my work and about my concept or concepts, and they had just said, well, you know, you need to go big. You need to take it bigger. And, you know, the size will enable these spaces to really speak to the viewer. And so this was the first of the large pieces, and from this point on, they remained large and got even bigger. And this piece was actually the last piece that was painted on canvas, because after this, I just determined that if I'm going to do something of this detail and depth and this time-consuming, it should be painted on linen. Because linen, I don't know if you guys any of you have ever used linen, but it's far superior to canvas, and it's really a joy to paint on. This piece is called Contemplating Babylon, parentheses, Christina's World. This is engine room number 9, which was the longest building in the world at one point. It was approximately a half-mile long. It's part of Bethlehem Steel, which was one of the 2 largest steel companies in the United States, if not the world, up until close to the 21st century. My girlfriend at the time was the daughter of the lawyer of Bethlehem Steel, and so this enabled me to get in here. This was right before Bethlehem Steel declared bankruptcy and shut the whole place down. So the name Christina is an homage to, not just to my girlfriend at the time, who was a heroin addict or a recovering heroin addict, and this was a whole, this to me spoke of the complexities of addiction and what she had to deal with. And on top of that, it was an homage to Christina's World, the famous painting by Andrew Wyeth, and the complexities of that piece and how he dealt with space in that piece as well. And then Christina, who was a cripple, and the whole history surrounding that. And as well as Contemplating Babylon, meaning when you stood at the door of this space, it was so massive that you felt like, you felt like a roach. You just felt so small. And I felt like, in many ways, it was like standing at the gates of a modern Babylon, and how it may have felt to stand at the threshold of Babylon, you know, hundreds and thousands of years ago. And in many ways, with industry and the Industrial Revolution and so forth, and the decline of industry in the US, this really spoke of another Babylon. This piece is entitled "She Never Ceases to Elude Me." I really liked the Dutch quality to this piece, and I also liked the fact that it was a men's locker room in Bethlehem Steel. Now here's a case of where I've merged multiple photographs together. Like, I wanted to show the beauty, but at the same time I wanted to put you in the place where you, in reality, and so I moved the urinal over to here because it actually was not that close to the doorway, for obvious reasons. But anyway, and I also added this space in here, so it was like this door, and then I put this in because I just like the Dutch quality to it, Vermeer-esque, if you will, feel. This piece is entitled "To Kiss Her Lips and Taste Goodbye." This is actually a very famous prison in Philadelphia called the Eastern State Penitentiary. I believe 400 monkeys, or it was some, what was that? 12. Is that the one with Brad Pitt and Bruce Willis? Yeah, it was filmed in here. And there was a couple other movies. Al Capone was also imprisoned here. It's a very influential prison as far as the setup of prisons across the world. It was Quaker-based, and the whole idea was that each prisoner was isolated, and each cell had a skylight, and the idea was that you were put in these cells, and you were supposed to be reflecting upon your wrongdoings, and the light from heaven would come in, and you would be God's light, and you would be enlightened, and you would see the wrong of your ways, and you would come out a better man. Needless to say, many of the people that were put in this prison went insane because of all the solitude. So in many ways, the title kind of reflects that whole idea of like, when he kissed her lips, he knew that it was goodbye. He knew that he was never coming out of this particular space. I also, heightened, as far as lighting is concerned, I heightened the cathedral-esque quality and the glow, the spiritual light for emphasis. This is about 6 feet by 4 feet as well. This piece is entitled In Reticence, 1,000 Voices. This is the last standing building of the Stetson hat factory that was in Philadelphia. The only images that remain of the Stetson hat factory are from the Smithsonian, and they're in black and white. But if you Google them, it's amazing. It was like a town within the city of Philadelphia. It had its own clock tower. It had its own fire department, its own hospital. I mean, it was just, the complex was massive. So anyway, there was one building remaining, and this is in a very impoverished area, drug-riddled area of North Philadelphia. And I saw it coming down, and I was like, I've got to get in there. I've got to capture this. So I figured, I was like, how am I going to do this? You know, this is a very tough area. The heroin trade is really big up there. It was in a part of an area known as the Badlands. So what I decided was I would go first thing in the morning. Hopefully they wouldn't be out yet. So I got there, and I pulled over the car, and I get out with my camera, and there was a guy on the corner already, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I got the hard stare, and I'm like, oh, you know, that's, you know, whatever. So then all of a sudden I realized there's a guy on the other side of the street, and he's watching me as well. And then I look further up the street, and there's another guy, and I'm like, oh. So I'm right at the threshold of the building, and I'm contemplating, should I? And I'm holding the camera, and I'm like, no, something tells me I need to walk away. So no sooner do I turn around and start walking back towards the car than the two guys that were up further come behind me, the one on one side and the other. I could just feel him behind me, and like he was so close. And you know, it was an incredibly stressful experience. And then, but I was calm, I was lucid. I just opened up the car door, got into the car, and drove off. And then I came back the next weekend, although this time I came back 1 hour earlier. And sure enough, they weren't out there yet. So I went in and boom, went up, ran around, so forth, so on, snapped shots, got out of there, got what I wanted. This piece is entitled, She is a Stairwell of Sundays. This kind of the title and this piece kind of tie into the whole Proustian or Marcel Proustian element that came into my work. Literature is a huge factor and influence in my work, and if you were to look at some of the titles of my pieces, I think you would see that. Proust always spoke about Sunday as being a time or a day where people are most likely to reflect and most likely to just become enwrapped in memory. And I just felt, without going on and on about the whole history of this town, because we don't have time, that the amount of memory that was in this space was just unimaginable. And I was also there on a Sunday, and I just felt like this stairwell and what have you was just indicative of Proust's idea of anything can be a vehicle or an impetus for memory. And this stirred up so much for me. Now here is another example of where I've merged two different things together. This is an elevator shaft next to the stairwell. This is from 2006. The piece before it was from 2005. To Kiss Her Lips was from 2003. And Contemplating Babylon was from 2003. Oh, no. This piece is entitled The Color of Her Eyes Was Green. This is again ties into the whole Proust idea of, and the whole romance of the train car, and I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this, but you know, you get on this train and you see this beautiful woman and you want to say something to her, and you just try and get up the courage, but somehow it just doesn't happen, and you get off the train or she gets off the train and you never see each other again. But that memory just resonates in your head, and it's attached to that train car. And so anyway, this is a rail car that was abandoned or was in a rail yard that I thought was abandoned. It turns out there is a gentleman living there in a caboose that is supposed to be security. I couldn't quite figure out how he took a shower or went to the bathroom, but I didn't dare ask because he kept his sunglasses on the entire time that he spoke to me, as he was wondering what I was doing meddling about the cars. These are all like seats that have been flipped up and turned on end. This is from 2005. This is an ironworks in Washington, Pennsylvania, which is south of Pittsburgh. It's no longer there. This piece is entitled Gather Me in Snowfall. This is a pure an example of where residencies have really started to become an asset. They're always, I encourage every artist, once you get out of school, to pursue or apply to as many residencies as possible. This was tied into a residency I did in Omaha, Nebraska, the Bemis Center for Contemporary Art. This was an old postal facility that obviously had been abandoned. But the thing is that I wanted my work to continue to evolve and to continue to grow. So I needed to pursue subjects in other places so that I could show that my concept, that it wasn't just limited to the Rust Belt or the East Coast or the Northeast, if you will. This was something that was going on everywhere. This piece is entitled So Many Lost Horizons. So with that, the idea, with these residencies, I was able to find other subject matter. I would go there, or I have gone to these places, and they'll have suggestions for you. And also, this particular place was very secure. Like there was no breaking and entering. You just were not getting into a federal building. But because Bemis was involved, they were able to make some phone calls and get me in there on the last day of my residency, actually. It's really crazy. I mean, it was like, it was almost like it wasn't going to happen. And then suddenly they got the call and said, if we go over there now, you can get in. Needless to say, I'm grateful that we did. This piece is entitled Futility Wields a Bow. This is from an old granary in Oklahoma City, or outside of Oklahoma City. This piece is from 2007. This is entitled Every Man Builds His Own Cathedral of Sand. I think that from the time we are born, we are instilled with this system of beliefs, and we then create our own system from whatever has been given to us. And I thought that this was for me, this is a prime example of how people started to drift away from the church as a means of salvation and more as in industry and the workplace as this will bring me a better life. But in reality, no matter what the cathedral, it always crumbles. This is a sugar refinery in Finland, and this is another example of the benefits of a residency. I never would have gotten into this sugar refinery had it not been for the powers that be at the residency and the Swiss council and in Finland, and making several phone calls. This piece is entitled Refinished. This was in the train car. This is a woman's bathroom. And for me, this is a commentary on Vanity. The piece is entitled, Whilst Gazing in the Mirror, Time, like Death, Gains Ground. This piece is entitled, The Golden Age of Smoke and Mirrors. This is from again, this ties into a residency that I did in the Czech Republic. This is a chemical factory that was half functioning and half not in Slovakia. And I caught wind of it, and we all hopped in a car and drove down here. And the crazy thing was that you had to have multiple people involved because half the chemical factory was still running. So, and they had dogs and security, and I was in a foreign country and I didn't speak the language. So it was really important that you had someone keeping watch on the roof. And so anyway, it was another example of like there was one hole in the barbed wire fence. We climbed up the fence, jumped through the hole and got in. I got my subject. I mean, took my photos and got out. And this piece is actually 6 feet by 8 or 9 feet. I'm not sure. This is a piece from which I'm sure you've noticed other work in the show. This is from the lost city of Pripyat, which was next to the Chernobyl reactor in the zone of exclusion in Ukraine. No one can ever live here again. This piece is entitled, From the Safest Places Come the Bravest Words. This is another piece dealing with Pripyat. This piece is entitled Caution to the Wind. It's approximately 6 feet by 8 or 9 feet. This is what you're looking at here is the city. You're up on a high rise and you're just looking out over the city. It was really, absolutely breathtaking. To just look out on this landscape and just there's no one, but there's plenty of buildings, plenty of lived-in spaces. This piece is also from Pripyat. This is entitled The Warmth of the Season, which is a play on words and what have you. But this is part of a amusement park that was scheduled to open the day after the meltdown. So it was never used. This is another painting from that amusement park. This piece is entitled Fairground Attraction. I was fascinated by this Ferris wheel and the fact that it was never used, and yet it is such an icon of the American dream and the romance of America and the notion of this state fair. And there you are getting on the Ferris wheel, and you're slowly going around in the twilight of the summer's eve, and it's the romance of it all. But here was a Ferris wheel that never had a chance to capture that moment for someone. And the thing is I find it interesting when this particular painting is exhibited, because I don't tell anybody where any of my subject matter is from unless they ask me. So it's always interesting because people will come up to it and they'll be like, oh, honey, look, it's a Ferris wheel. And they'll get, there'll be this like moment of glee, and then they'll see me, and then they'll ask me like, oh, where's that Ferris wheel from, and so forth. And then when I tell them, immediately it changes the whole dynamic of the piece and of the subject for them, and it's fascinating. This is another example of where I've manipulated the lighting. Like the sky was certainly not that beautiful shade at the time I was there. Because I was also there, I made a point of going to the zone during winter because the thing that gets to you the most is the radioactive dust, and the snow keeps the dust down. So if you go there in the summer, the threat of it getting into your lungs is so much greater than in the winter. This piece was a painting that I did from a ship factory or a shipping facility on Cockatoo Island in Sydney Harbor. This was part of my research that I was doing while I was the visiting artist / professor at the Australian National University. This particular piece is entitled Foolish Thing, Desire. This particular piece is from 2010. This is Bethlehem Steel. The piece is called The Promise We Are Given Leads to the Burden We Become. It basically ties into the argument that Bethlehem Steel said that the pensions were what it was that drove the company into bankruptcy. It was the workers themselves that caused the steel company to go under, when in reality, it was the mismanagement of the company and the unwillingness to change or evolve. It really had nothing to do with the unions. But I also thought that it was interesting because I think in an existential sense, it tied into the whole notion of like you're from the time that you're like a little kid, you're filled, your parents fill you with this promise, and they tell you like, if you work hard, if you study hard, you're going to get somewhere. But then as you grow older and as you have children, and then as you get older and older, and as our population is now getting older and older, and people are living into their 90s and what have you, that promise becomes nothing but a burden to those that you've given birth to, who you are instilling that same promise in. And it's just this cyclical thing. This is also the Chernobyl zone of exclusion, this is Pripyat. This is a library and a school. This piece is entitled Où est désormais Maldoror, which is basically says, where to now, Maldoror. This is a literary reference to the surrealist writer, the Comte de Lautremont, and the first work of surrealist fiction, Maldoror, Maldoror was the Antichrist. And it's a crazy piece of writing. I highly recommend it, but it's not for the weak-hearted. It is brutal writing, very violent, disgusting. But anyway, I thought to myself that this is, a prime example of like just in the case of, man is Maldoror, man is the Antichrist. This is a disaster that man created. man wreaked havoc here. And it's like, where to now? Maldoror. Obviously, Japan was the next step. And where are we going now, you know, with climate change and our, you know, refusal to accept that temperatures are rising and disasters are hitting left and right? You know, what's next? This piece is from 2011. This is Detroit. This is the Packard motor car company, which in many ways I felt was a harbinger for the big three, because Packard went under in the 60s because it just got too big and couldn't do it anymore, and thus went belly up. This outspoken, outsourced. These are all pink slips. This was an office where many of the men and women received their walking papers when the whole facility was closing down. This is also a commentary on corporations and how when you speak up and you try and you speak up for justice, for your fellow workers and what have you, your job is immediately outsourced, you know, to some sweatshop over in China or India where they don't speak about anything, or they'll, you know. This piece is also from Detroit. It's entitled "This Heartbeat of America," which I don't know if any of you remember the Chevrolet advertising campaign where they talked about the heartbeat of America, but this is a reference. The title is a reference to that. Usually, well, for many years, I have not included a figure in my work because I felt that the spaces themselves had such a humanistic quality, and they were so figurative in their own right that there was really no need for a body because the presence was already there. But I have since then put a figure in this painting and one in the piece, one of the pieces that's here. This piece is entitled "Closer Every Year." It's basically, it's of an old theater in Bulgaria, and it's in a town that is more or less forgotten, like so many other towns in Bulgaria, because when the one beauty of the Soviet Union or the communist era was that these towns flourished. And now that capitalism has come in, these towns have disintegrated, and all the youth have left, and the factories have closed, and all that's left are these dilapidating, dying people and buildings. And the idea of the theater and life being a theater and having the figure, this aging man looking up into this heavenly light, and, you know, we're closer every year, closer to death. And I think that's it, I guess.